Hello and welcome back to our last presentation on doping legalities and anti-doping codes. We're going to be looking first of all at altitude training as a legal method of enhancing performance, as well as anti-doping codes and the role of WADA and ASADA in administering these anti-doping codes. So firstly, with altitude training, this generally occurs, or high altitude training, in excess of 2,000 metres. And what happens, the higher up you go, the thinner the air is, which therefore reduces the partial pressure of oxygen. And this creates what's known as a hypoxic environment where there's less oxygen available. So that creates this oxygen deficit, which in response to that, the body then goes and creates or releases more EPO or erythropoietin from the kidneys, which then act upon the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And also as a result of being at high altitude, because of the oxygen deficit, there is some responses by the body. There's an increase in breathing rate, an increase in heart rate because there's not enough oxygen for the body. Therefore, it responds with these acute responses in order to try and increase the oxygen available for the working muscles. There's also a decrease in the blood flow to the brain. It can cause headaches, nausea, sleeplessness as a result of altitude sickness. There's also less oxygen that's taken up and used per minute per kilogram of muscle, so a decrease in the VO2, as well as maximal intensities, there's a decrease in VO2 max. So we'll have a look at the adaptations in a moment. So generally what has been brought about by sports scientists is this live high, train low model, which is where it sees athletes living or sleeping at a high altitude between 2,000 to 2,500 metres, but they train low, so they train at sea level because that enables them to train at higher intensities because they have normal pressure of oxygen in the air. And the reason why this was brought about is because simply moving to Mexico is completely costly, completely impractical for many athletes. So what a lot of sports scientists did is produce altitude houses. There's one at the AIS. Also, they've produced altitude simulation tents, and the beauty of those is that athletes can have these in their own homes. They can breathe the air in masks that where the air is hypoxic. So it's creating these hypoxic environments. The benefits of hypoxic training is that over time they increase their amount of EPO produced, as was mentioned earlier, which also then goes ahead and increases the red blood cell concentration and hemoglobin concentration, which therefore increases the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. There's also an increase in myoglobin concentration, which means that more oxygen can be taken into the muscle site. There's also an increase in mitochondria, number and size of mitochondria, as well as the concentration of mitochondrial enzymes. Because there's less oxygen available, the body responds by producing more mitochondria and bigger mitochondria in order to try and get more oxygen into the working muscles, as well as greater number of enzymes, mitochondrial enzymes. Therefore, when the athlete goes back to sea level, that means that because of the greater amount of mitochondria, mitochondrial enzymes, myoglobin, hemoglobin, therefore more oxygen is available for the working muscle, and this promotes glycogen sparing as it enhances fat metabolism because sufficient amounts of oxygen are available for greater amounts of fat metabolism. So there's some real benefits with altitude training. Now let's have a look at the anti-doping agencies. So the International Doping Agency, at the international level is known as WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. At the national level, we have ASADA, which is the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority rather than agency. And we also have the Australian Sports Commission. And working under ASADA are the different at the organisational level. So AFL have their own anti-doping codes. They use part of ASADA's and they've created their own illegal doping code. Clean Edge, which is Sports Medicine Australia, Gymnastics Australia, sorry about the typo. So there's a number of different sporting organisations that use ASADA as its key framework for an anti-doping agency. Let's have a look at WADA. So the mission of WADA is to promote, manage and monitor the fight against doping in sport in all its forms, and it has this philosophy of play true, which is providing a doping-free culture in sport. The roles of WADA are to monitor what they've put together as the World Anti-Doping Code. So back in 2004, WADA was established, and within that year they produced the World Anti-Doping Code. And part of their job is to monitor and update that code. They also conduct scientific research, so they look into drugs and newly formed drugs, and they also develop anti-doping capacities, so different tests according to what drugs are available on the market. An important part of what they do is educate other organisations at the national level, such as ASADA. They also provide the WADA list of prohibited substances, and that can be found at that website there, and it's constantly updated. So WADA put together the World Anti-Doping Code, and this is used as a benchmark. It's a set of anti-doping rules, and what it aims to do is harmonise all anti-doping policies, which is another word for creating consistency with anti-doping policies and regulations for various sporting organisations across the world, so that we don't go into different sports and they have different rules for doping. WADA determines what substances and methods are prohibited, and these, in order for them to be included on the prohibited list, they have to be proven by medical or scientific evidence that they are used to enhance performance, that they pose a threat to the health of the athletes, and that they are considered to violate the spirit of the sport. Now, the values of the World Anti-Doping Code have been identified. These particular ones in blue are the ones that have been identified in your key knowledge, so they are the ones that you really need to familiarise yourself with. So the anti-doping codes are known to try and preserve the spirit of the sport. So what's really intrinsically or internally valued in sport. So promoting the spirit of the sport. And it's characterised by these particular values. So ethics, fair play and honesty, health and safety, role modelling for children, and then within the maintenance and the spirit of the sport, trying to promote excellence in performance, providing fun and joy in the activity, promoting the opportunity for teamwork and collaboration, promoting dedication and commitment to sport, making sure that athletes show respect for rules and laws, and as well as for one another within their teams and for themselves, that they provide an opportunity for courage as well as community and solidarity, people working together. And it's considered that doping essentially goes against all of these values. So what WADA does with testing, and this is an important role, is that it plans and conducts a number of in-competition as well as out-of-competition testing to athletes over whom they have jurisdiction. And the testing occurs in laboratories that have been approved by WADA. Some athletes can get a therapeutic use exemption. So, for instance, if they're, needing to be on hay fever tablets, and they may have some stimulants within that medication, so they can apply for a therapeutic use exemption for that period of time. However, athletes who are found guilty of using prohibited substances on the prohibited list are actually found to be in violation of the anti-doping code. So some potential consequences of this can be disqualifications and so on. And probably our most recent famous case is that of Lance Armstrong, where he was stripped of 7 Tour de France titles. Marion Jones, as was mentioned previously, at the Sydney Olympics in 2000, she was stripped of her 3 gold and 2 bronze medals, where she won 5 medals. And not only that, so she was actually banned from the 2008 Beijing Olympics as a result of that, and she spent 6 months in prison for it, and is spent 2 years on probation after being found guilty and admitting to using the drugs. In NFL, there's been 54 players suspended for doping charges over the years. And as we know, Ben Johnson was stripped of his gold medal for the 100 metres at the Seoul Olympics. So there's been some very famous cases. Sanctions are administered by the individual sporting organisations, not by WADA, and that so therefore that's come from those particular sporting organisations. Now, the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority, that is ASADA, it uses the anti-doping laws set by WADA and includes the list of prohibited substances that have been put together by WADA. So ASADA is actually the organisation responsible for enforcing this World Anti-Doping Code within Australia. Its main aims are to achieve its purpose, which are to deter, detect, and enforce in regards to doping. So to try and deter people is all about education here, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. To detect, and that's an important part of their role, to do their drug testing, as well as enforce and provide consequences for those who have been found to be guilty. So through education, the deter part of ASADA's focus and purpose is to enhance athletes' understanding of anti-doping in sport, to try and reduce the likelihood of them being in a situation where they are doping, and to decrease the occurrence of inadvertent doping as well. So if we have a look at the testing, the doping violations enforced by WADA and ASADA, they see if there's a presence of a prohibited substances through testing the sample. They use or, so they are also, there's a violation if they use or have attempted use of using a prohibited substance, if they refuse to submit a sample, if they fail to meet availability requirements for either in or out of competition, if they tamper with any part of the doping control, and this is much less reported upon now because of the stringent guidelines that they have, and you saw that if you watched that last video on ASADA and how they watch them urinate, and they test through urine, blood samples, or both. Having possession of a prohibited substance, trafficking, or administering any drugs in sport, either in or out of competition, to assist in performance. So there's the organisation known as Clean Edge, which is part of the anti-doping movement by Sports Medicine Australia, and that aims to support all levels of sport, so all different sports in staying clean, and it gives advice to different organisations on their website. There's also FIFA, and in fact, they've been quite at the forefront of anti-doping. They even introduced doping controls back in 1970. So they were quite ahead of their time, and they accepted the World Anti-Doping Code in 2009, and their aims are to uphold and preserve the ethics of their sport, to safeguard physical health and mental integrity of players, and make sure that all competitors are on an equal footing. And they've actually reported between 1994 and 2008, they've only reported 3 positive tests, which is only 0.05% of all doping controls, which is a fantastic result. Gymnastics Australia, they also, their rationale is for all athletes to have the fundamental right to participate in doping-free sport and to provide harmonised, coordinated and effective anti-doping programs. And the AFL, they actually have 2 drug policies, the Anti-Doping Code and the Illicit Drug Policy, which has come against some criticism. And the anti-doping stand that the AFL have used is to ensure that the AFL competition is conducted and is based on athletic prowess and natural levels of fitness rather than on any prohibited substances and methods that are used to enhance performance or recovery. It's also designed to try and protect players from using substances which can cause long-term or immediate harm to their bodies. They aim to educate their players to understand the dangers and consequences of the use of performance-enhancing substances, and they want to set an example for all participants, so for all kids, right down to the Auskick kids within AFL, that they do condemn the use of performance-enhancing substances. So I hope you enjoyed all of our presentations and that you are good to go for your SAC for strategies to enhance performance.